When you think about the First World War, it's easy to picture this futile, pointless slaughter. Millions of guys dying in muddy trenches for, a few yards of land? But what if that's not the whole story? What if the countries involved actually had very clear, incredibly high stakes in mind? Let's dig in and see what they were really fighting for. So that's the big question, right? Was it all for nothing? To answer that, we've got to look past the battlefield and into the war rooms, the parliaments, the places where leaders had very specific goals. They weren't just stumbling into chaos. They were fighting for something they truly believed was essential for their nation's survival and its future. And the key concept we need to get our heads around is war aims. Basically, this is the list of things each government was willing to go to war for. And here's a crucial point. These aims weren't set in stone. Oh no, they changed constantly as the war dragged on, which, as you could imagine, made finding any kind of off-ramp or negotiated peace almost impossible. And it wasn't just about grabbing land or resources. This quote from H.G. Wells absolutely nails it. He understood that this was a war of ideas. It was a battle for hearts and minds. Each side was totally convinced they were fighting a righteous crusade for their version of civilization against an enemy they saw as, frankly, barbaric. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the Central Powers goals, then jump over to the Allies' ambitions. After that, we'll look at why America got involved, and finally, we'll see how all these grand plans stacked up against the cold, hard reality of the outcome. First up, the Central Powers. For these empires, the war was this really intense mix of aggressive ambition on one hand and a desperate, almost paranoid fear for their own survival on the other. And it all really kicked off with Austria-Hungary. Now, you might think they wanted a giant war, but their initial goal was surprisingly small scale. All they wanted was a quick, local war to punish Serbia after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. In fact, the Archduke himself had been pretty dismissive of the whole idea, once calling Serbia nothing more than a band of thieves, assassins, bandits, and a few plump threes. And you can just watch their goals spiral out of control here. It starts with just wanting to smack down Serbia to stay relevant. Then, as the war gets bigger, they start thinking, hey, maybe we can annex some territory. A little later, they're so dependent on their German allies, a major goal becomes just not getting totally absorbed by them. And by the end, the empire is literally falling apart, and all they're hoping for is a white peace, basically a draw, just to survive. Okay, let's turn to Germany, because their war aims are maybe the most debated of the entire conflict. The core idea for their ambition was a concept called Mitteleuropa. Think of it as a German-dominated economic and political union right in the heart of Europe. We're not just talking a free trade zone, we're talking about cementing Germany as the continent's absolute, undisputed top dog. But here's the thing. Inside Germany, there was this massive fight going on. On one side, you had moderates who were pushing for what was called a Scheidemann peace, a compromise, no new territory, let's just end this. But on the other side, you had the military hardliners, led by guys like Hindenburg, who wanted a Hindenburg peace, a total victory with huge land grabs from France, Belgium, and Russia. Well, the hardliners won that argument, and their vision was enormous. They wanted to dominate Europe, annex land left and right, expand their colonial empire in Africa, and if you want proof of their true intentions, you just have to look at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It was the incredibly harsh peace they forced on Russia in 1918. It wasn't a peace treaty. It was a conqueror's dictate designed to permanently cripple their rival. And finally, for the Central Powers, you have the Ottoman Empire. Now, they were coming into this war from a position of real weakness. So for them, this was a defensive gamble. The so-called sick man of Europe was making a desperate play to get its sovereignty back. They wanted to tear up these humiliating economic treaties called capitulations that gave Europeans all this power inside their borders. For them, this was a war for true independence. Okay, let's hop across the trenches and look at the Allies. You'll see their ambitions were kind of a mirror image, part reaction to what Germany was doing, and part pursuit of their own long-standing imperial goals. Man, Russia's journey through the war is a complete roller coaster. They jump in 1914 to protect Serbia and, flex their muscles as a great power. By 1915, they're dreaming of finally capturing their historic prize, Constantinople. But then, revolution. The first new government in early 1917 wants peace without annexations. And by October, the Bolsheviks have taken over, and they just want out, at any cost, to save their own revolution. For France, the war was about one thing, one single, overriding, non-negotiable objective: security. They were right next door to a bigger, more powerful Germany, and their goal was absolute. That meant getting back the lost provinces of Alsace-Lorraine for sure. But it also meant crushing Prussian militarism so it could never, ever threaten France again. Everything they did was driven by that deep-seated need for safety. And nobody, and I mean nobody, captured this relentless spirit better than their Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau. Just listen to this. He's saying there's no difference between what he does at home and abroad. It's all war, all the time, until France is finally completely and totally secure. That is some serious resolve. So, why did Britain get into this fight? Well, for them, it came down to two things that were completely intertwined: preserving the balance of power in Europe and protecting their massive global empire. See, if Germany dominated the continent, it would be a direct threat to Britain's trade, its navy, its colonies, its entire place in the world. And Britain's aims were laser-focused and strategic. Number one, restore Belgian independence. Then, they had to eliminate the German fleet that was challenging their control of the seas. They also wanted to dismantle Germany's colonial empire and take it for themselves. And they were looking to the future, carving up the Ottoman Empire in the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement to control Middle Eastern oil and protect the route to India. And then there's Italy. They joined the Allies in 1915, and they were brutally honest about their motivations. They called their policy sacro egoismo, sacred egoism. It was pure, cold-blooded calculation. They basically took bids from both sides and went with the Allies because they offered a better deal in terms of territory. Their goal was to snatch Italian-speaking lands from Austria-Hungary and build their own little empire. All right, let's bring in the final major player to enter the ring: the United States. America's entry in 1917 was different. It wasn't just about security or grabbing land. It was driven by this huge, idealistic, and some would say naive, vision to completely remake the world.
America's reasons were really a mix. On the one hand, you had the totally practical stuff. German U-boats were sinking American ships, and the Zimmermann telegram, where Germany tried to get Mexico to attack the U.S., was the last straw. But on the other hand, you had President Woodrow Wilson's radical vision for a new world order based on democracy, the right of people to rule themselves, and a League of Nations to make sure a war like this could never happen again.
So, every single one of these nations went to war with a clear set of goals. But after 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed, how did those dreams stack up against the final tragic reality? Let's do the accounting. This final tally is just staggering. Germany wanted to dominate Europe. It ended in total defeat and economic ruin. Austria-Hungary fought to preserve its empire. It was completely erased from the map. Russia wanted to expand its influence. It collapsed into revolution and a brutal civil war. And even for the winners, the victory was bitter. France won, but its security was as shaky as ever. Britain achieved its main strategic goals, but at a cost that bankrupted the country. And the US? It got its victory, but saw its idealistic peace plan completely rejected. So we come full circle. Was the First World War pointless? No, not at all. The nations involved had very real, very concrete, high-stakes goals they were fighting for. But the absolute catastrophic failure of nearly every one of them to achieve what they set out to do, and the unimaginable price paid even for limited success, created a legacy of anger and instability that would lead directly to an even worse war just 2 decades later. Which leaves us with the truly haunting question: was any of it worth the price?